My wife said she wanted to do a DNA test on our son. I have doubts, she explained quietly over dinner. I laughed, thinking she was being paranoid after 14 years of raising Ethan together. But when the results came, the doctor looked at me seriously and said, "You better sit down." My name is Nathan Cole. I'm 42 years old, Staff Sergeant with the 82nd Airborne, stationed at Fort Liberty. I've been married to Becky for 15 years, and we have a 14-year-old son named Ethan, who's the center of our world. That Tuesday evening request seemed innocent enough. Becky explained she'd been reading about genetic predispositions and wanted a complete family medical profile for Ethan's records. The pediatrician mentioned it might be helpful, she said, not quite meeting my eyes. You know, with your family history of heart disease and mine with diabetes? It made sense. I'd seen enough soldiers get blindsided by hereditary conditions they never knew about. Becky and I met when I was 27, fresh off my second deployment to Iraq. She was working at the base commissary, had this way of making everyone feel like they mattered. Not the kind of woman who chased after uniforms, she actually seemed annoyed when soldiers tried to impress her with war stories. That's what drew me to her. She was real. We married a year later in a simple ceremony at the base chapel. Ethan came along the following year, born at the military hospital on post. I remember holding him for the first time, this tiny thing with a shock of dark hair, thinking I'd never been responsible for anything so important. The delivery had complications. Becky needed an emergency C-section, but everything turned out fine. Or so we thought. Ethan grew up to be a good kid. Respectful, curious, had this habit of taking apart electronics just to see how they worked. He looked like Becky around the eyes, had my stubborn streak. Never gave us serious trouble, made decent grades, played JV basketball. The kind of son any father would be proud of. So when Becky brought up the DNA testing, I didn't hesitate. I made a call to Dr. Martinez at the base medical center, explained what we needed. He set us up with a comprehensive genetic screening through their family medicine department. Military healthcare, one of the few perks that actually worked the way it was supposed to. This is just routine, right? I asked Becky as we drove to the appointment. She nodded, but something in her posture felt off. Shoulders too straight, hands folded too carefully in her lap. I'd learned to read body language in the field. It kept you alive. But I pushed the observation aside. Marriage wasn't a combat zone. The testing itself was straightforward. Cheek swabs for all three of us, some paperwork, a brief consultation with the genetics counselor who explained the process. Ethan asked why we needed to do this, and Becky gave him the same explanation she'd given me. Just being thorough about family health, she said. He shrugged and went along with it. 14-year-olds don't question much when it comes to medical stuff. Dr. Martinez said results would take 7 to 10 business days. Standard turnaround for comprehensive genetic analysis. We scheduled a follow-up appointment to review the findings, and I went back to my normal routine. Morning PT, training schedules, equipment maintenance. The kind of structured life that had always made sense to me. But Becky seemed increasingly distant as the days passed. She'd started going to bed earlier, claiming headaches. Conversations became shorter, more functional. Dinner's ready. Ethan has practice at 6. The bank called about the car loan. Nothing wrong exactly, just different, like she was already somewhere else in her head. On day 8, Dr. Martinez called personally. Nathan, can you and Becky come in this afternoon? I'd like to discuss the results in person rather than over the phone. His tone was carefully neutral, the way medical professionals sound when they're about to deliver news you don't want to hear. Is there a problem? I asked. Let's just say it would be better to discuss this face-to-face. Can you both make it by 1400 hours? I found Becky in the kitchen, staring out the window at nothing in particular. That was Dr. Martinez. He wants to see us today about the results. She turned, and for just a second, I saw something in her expression that looked almost like relief. Okay, she said quietly. I'll call in sick to work. The revelation. The drive to the medical center was silent except for the radio playing some country song about second chances. Becky stared out the passenger window, fingers twisting her wedding ring. A nervous habit I'd noticed more often lately. I kept thinking about Dr. Martinez's tone on the phone. In the military, you learn to read between the lines. Nothing good ever came from, "We need to discuss this in person." The base medical center smelled like antiseptic and coffee that had been brewing too long. We checked in at the front desk, and the receptionist directed us to Dr. Martinez's office. He was waiting with a manila folder and an expression that confirmed my worst suspicions. "Please, both of you, have a seat," he said, gesturing to the chairs across from his desk. Then he opened the folder and looked directly at me. "Nathan, before I share these results, I need to ask, are you prepared for the possibility that the findings might be unexpected?" I glanced at Becky. She was staring at her hands. "Doc, just tell us what you found." Dr. Martinez nodded slowly. "The genetic analysis shows that Ethan is not biologically related to you, Nathan. The probability of paternity is 0%. He paused, letting that sink in. "However, there's something else. Something that raises additional concerns." My hearing seemed to narrow to a tunnel. Not my son. 15 years of teaching him to throw a football, helping with homework, coaching his little league team? Not mine. But Dr. Martinez wasn't finished. He looked at Becky, then back at me. "We ran a comprehensive panel that includes maternal matching as well. According to these results, Ethan is also not biologically related to Becky." The world stopped. "I'm sorry, what?" Becky's voice came out as a whisper. "You both need to sit down," Dr. Martinez said, though we were already seated. "According to the DNA analysis, Ethan is not the biological child of either of you. This suggests a hospital mix-up at birth, what we call an infant abduction or switch. It's rare, but it does occur." I stared at the papers in his hands like they might catch fire and burn away this impossible information. "Are you certain? Could there be an error?" "We ran the test twice to confirm. I'm afraid there's no mistake." Dr. Martinez set the folder on his desk. "I've seen this before. Hospital protocols weren't as stringent 14 years ago, especially during emergencies or high-volume periods. If there was confusion in the nursery, infants could have been inadvertently switched." Becky made a sound that was half sob, half gasp. "Where is he then? Where is our real son?" "That's something we'll need to investigate. I'll need to pull records from the hospital where Ethan was born, identify other births that occurred around the same time. It's going to require some detective work." I felt like I was underwater, everything muffled and distorted. 14 years. Every birthday, every Christmas morning, every proud moment watching him grow up. Was none of it real? But then I looked at Becky, and something else clicked into place. "How long have you suspected this?" I asked her quietly. She couldn't meet my eyes. I wasn't sure. There were little things. His blood type didn't match either of ours, but the doctor said it was possible. And he never looked quite like either of us, but children don't always... "How long, Becky?" "A few months, maybe longer." Her voice was barely audible. I kept telling myself I was being paranoid. Dr. Martinez cleared his throat. "This is obviously a shock for both of you. I'm going to refer you to a counselor who specializes in these situations. And I'll begin the process of researching hospital records from Ethan's birth date. We need to find out what happened and who else might be affected." The investigation. I drove home in complete silence. Becky cried quietly in the passenger seat, and I didn't know how to comfort her. How do you comfort someone when the foundation of your entire family has just cracked open? Ethan was at basketball practice. We had 2 hours before he came home, before we'd have to figure out how to tell a 14-year-old boy that everything he knew about his identity was wrong. "We need a plan," I said, falling back on military thinking. "First, we don't say anything to Ethan until we know more. Second, I'm going to use my contacts to speed up this investigation." Becky nodded without looking at me. "I keep thinking about the hospital. That night was chaos. I was in labor for 18 hours, then the emergency C-section. They kept taking him away for tests, bringing him back. I was so drugged up I barely remember the first few days. I remember those days differently. Clear, precise moments burned into my memory. Holding my son for the first time, watching Becky's face when she first saw him. The pride that filled my chest like a physical force. Had all of that been built on a lie? But then I thought about what Dr. Martinez had said. Hospital mix-up, not deception. Nobody had intentionally deceived anyone. It was a mistake. A horrible accident that had shaped 3 lives for 14 years. I called my buddy Mike Rodriguez, who worked in Army CID, Criminal Investigation Division. Not because this was criminal, but because he knew how to dig through records and find information that others might miss. Mike, I need a favor. Personal matter, but I need someone who knows how to investigate. What's going on, Nathan? I explained the situation. Mike listened without interrupting, which I appreciated. Most people would have started asking questions or offering sympathy. Mike just processed the information. Hospital records from 2009, he said when I finished. That's going to be tricky, but not impossible. What hospital? Fort Liberty Medical Center, obstetrics ward. Military facility, that actually helps. Better record keeping than civilian hospitals. Give me 48 hours. The next 2 days felt like a deployment countdown. Time moving both too fast and too slow. Becky took sick leave from her job at the school district. I went through my duties on autopilot. Ethan sensed something was wrong but didn't push when we said we were dealing with some medical results. Mike called on Thursday evening. I found something. There were 4 births in the obstetrics ward between January 15th and 17th, 2009. 2 boys, 2 girls. One of the boys was Ethan, born to you and Becky on the 16th. The other boy was born on the 15th to Jack and Sarah Harris. I wrote down the name. What do you know about the Harris family? Jack Harris, former Marine Corps sergeant, medically retired in 2010. Sarah Harris worked as a base housing coordinator. They have a son named Kyle, born January 15th, 2009. Same height and weight as Ethan's birth records. Are they still in the area? Moved to Virginia in 2012 when Jack took a job with a defense contractor. I can get you contact information, but Nathan, you need to think about how you want to handle this. That night, I sat in my garage with a beer I wasn't drinking, yes, staring at the name Jack and Sarah Harris written on a piece of paper. Somewhere in Virginia, there was a family who might be going through the same confusion we were. Or maybe they had no idea. Maybe they were happily raising our biological son while we struggled with the truth about theirs. I heard the door from the house open. Becky appeared, wrapped in the old army sweatshirt she wore when she was upset. I've been thinking, she said, not quite stepping into the garage. About that night at the hospital, I remember a nurse, young woman, seemed nervous. She kept apologizing for things, taking too long with the blood work, having trouble with the IV. And there was another woman in the room next to mine. I could hear her crying and talking about her husband being deployed. Sarah Harris? Becky looked surprised. You found them? Mike got me a name. Jack and Sarah Harris had a son named Kyle on January 15th. Jack was a Marine. Oh, God. Becky sat down on the step leading into the garage. So there's another family out there going through this? Maybe, or maybe they don't know yet. We sat in silence for a while. Finally, Becky said, "What are we going to tell Ethan?" The truth, but not until we know what we're dealing with. And what if the Harris family wants him back? What if they want Kyle back? It was the question that had been eating at me for 2 days. I don't know, but Ethan is our son. Maybe not biologically, but he's ours. 14 years of bedtime stories and soccer games and helping with math homework doesn't get erased by a DNA test. Becky started crying again. I don't know how to process this. Everything feels like a lie. It's not a lie, I said, surprised by the conviction in my own voice. Love isn't a lie. The last 14 years aren't a lie. A mistake was made, but that doesn't make our family fake. Hi. But even as I said it, I could see something shifting in Becky's expression. Something that looked like doubt or fear, or maybe just the beginning of a retreat that would define everything that came next. The contact. I called Jack Harris on Friday morning after PT. Military to military, I figured it was the most straightforward approach. Mr. Harris, this is Staff Sergeant Nathan Cole. I'm calling about a sensitive matter regarding our sons, who were born at Fort Liberty Medical Center in January 2009. There was a long pause. What kind of matter? I think it would be better if we discuss this in person. My wife and I discovered some information about a possible mix-up at the hospital. I believe it affects both our families. Another pause, longer this time. Mix-up how? Hospital records and DNA tests suggest our sons may have been switched at birth. The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally, Jack Harris said, "Jesus Christ. Sarah's been saying for years that something felt off. Kyle's blood type, some of his features. We always just... Shit. Would you and your wife be willing to meet? We could drive to Virginia, or you could come here. We need to figure out what happened and how to handle it. Let me talk to Sarah. Can I call you back?" He called back 3 hours later. "We'll drive down tomorrow. Sarah says she needs to see for herself." That evening, Becky and I finally told Ethan what was happening. He listened with the kind of careful attention that reminded me he was growing up, becoming someone who could handle difficult truths. "So, I'm not really your son?" he asked when we finished explaining. "You are our son," I said firmly. "Biology doesn't change 14 years of being a family, but there's another boy out there who might be our biological child, and another family who raised him thinking he was theirs. Are you going to want him instead of me?" The question hit like a physical blow. Becky reached for him, but he pulled back slightly. "Ethan, look at me," I said. "There is no instead. You're my son. You're going to meet another family tomorrow, and maybe another boy who shares your DNA, but that doesn't change who you are or where you belong. But what if I want to live with them? What if they want Kyle back? Then we'll figure it out, together, as a family." The Harris family arrived Saturday afternoon in a Honda Pilot with Virginia plates. Jack Harris was shorter than I'd expected, maybe 5'8", with graying hair and the kind of watchful eyes that came from military service. Sarah was blonde, tired-looking, with nervous energy that showed in the way she kept adjusting her purse strap. And Kyle. Kyle looked exactly like a younger version of myself. Same jawline, same way of standing with his weight shifted to his left foot, same habit of tilting his head when he was thinking. It was like looking at a photograph of myself at 14. Ethan and Kyle stared at each other with the kind of cautious curiosity that teenagers show when they're trying not to seem interested in something that obviously fascinated them. "Well," Sarah Harris said quietly, "I guess we don't need a DNA test to confirm anything." We spent the afternoon talking in carefully measured conversations. The Harris family had always had questions about Kyle's appearance, his blood type, certain personality traits that seemed to come from nowhere. But they'd never pursued it seriously. Military families moved often, medical records sometimes got lost, and children don't always look like their parents. "The thing is," Jack Harris said during a quiet moment, while the boys were in the backyard throwing a football, "Kyle is our son. We've raised him, worried about him, been proud of him for 14 years. I don't know how to untangle that." "I feel the same way about Ethan," I said. "But we can't pretend this didn't happen." Sarah was watching the boys through the kitchen window. They're so different. Kyle is quiet, analytical, always has been. But Ethan seems more, I don't know, outgoing? "Ethan gets that from Becky," I said, then caught myself. Did he? Or was it just who he was, regardless of genetics? "What do we do now?" Becky asked. It was Jack who answered. "We take it slow. Let the boys get to know each other. Figure out what everyone wants and needs. This isn't about ownership, it's about what's best for both kids. Over the next several months, we developed a routine. The Harris family would visit monthly, sometimes we'd drive to Virginia. Ethan and Kyle built a careful friendship, different from typical teenage relationships, but genuine in its own way. They shared certain mannerisms, certain ways of thinking that clearly came from genetics, but their personalities had been shaped by 14 years of different families, different environments. The unraveling. The problem started with Becky. At first, she seemed to handle the situation better than I'd expected. She was warm to the Harris family, kind to Kyle, supportive of Ethan's growing relationship with his biological parents. But gradually, I noticed changes. She became obsessed with fairness, making sure Kyle felt welcome when he visited, worrying about whether Ethan felt neglected when we talked about the other family. She started researching support groups for families dealing with switched-at-birth situations, reading every article she could find about the psychological impacts on children and parents. "Did you know," she said one evening, reading from her laptop, "that in 67% of these cases, at least one marriage ends in divorce within 2 years?" "Why are you reading that stuff?" "Because I need to understand what's happening to us." She closed the laptop and looked at me. "Nathan, I don't know how to be Ethan's mother anymore." "What do you mean?" "Every time I look at him, I think about Kyle, about how Kyle should have been the one I was raising, about the child I never got to know." She started crying. "And then I feel guilty because Ethan deserves better than a mother who's constantly wondering about the child she lost." "You didn't lose Kyle. He was never ours to lose." "Wasn't he? Don't I have the right to grieve for 14 years I'll never get back with my biological son?" I didn't have an answer for that. The situation was too unprecedented, too complicated for simple solutions or easy comfort. Things got worse when Becky started pushing for more time with Kyle. She wanted him to visit for a full week during summer break. She suggested that maybe Kyle might want to attend high school in our district. The schools were better than what he had in Virginia. She began talking about making up for lost time and building a real relationship with my son. Sarah Harris was patient at first, understanding even. But when Becky started calling Kyle directly, making plans without consulting his parents, the dynamic shifted. "I think we need to step back," Sarah told us during one of our monthly meetings. "Kyle is getting confused about his place in two families, and honestly, so are we." "I'm his mother," Becky said quietly. "I have rights." "Actually," Jack Harris said carefully, "you don't, not legally. Kyle is our son in every way that matters. Legally, emotionally, practically. We're willing to maintain a relationship, but within boundaries." The conversation ended badly. Becky left the room crying, and I found myself apologizing for my wife's behavior while simultaneously trying to understand it. That night, Becky packed a bag and went to stay with her sister in Charlotte. "I need time to think," she said. "This whole situation is breaking me apart, and I don't know how to fix it." She came back a week later, but something fundamental had changed. She was distant with Ethan, trying too hard to be normal. She avoided talking about Kyle or the Harris family. When I suggested family counseling, she agreed, but only attended 3 sessions before claiming it wasn't helping. "I think I want Kyle to come live with us," she said one evening out of nowhere. "Becky, that's not realistic." "Why not? I'm his biological mother. We could give him opportunities the Harris family can't." "Like what?" "Better schools, college planning, financial support." Jack Harris works for a defense contractor, but we both know military benefits are better long-term. I stared at her. "Are you listening to yourself? You want to take a 14-year-old boy away from the only family he's ever known because we have better insurance?" "He's my son, Nathan." "No," I said firmly. "He's the Harris family's son. We contributed DNA, but that's all." The fight that followed was ugly. Becky accused me of not caring about our real son, of being satisfied with the substitute we'd been raising. I told her she was losing perspective, that her obsession with Kyle was destroying our actual family. She moved out again 2 weeks later. This time, she didn't come back. Moving forward. The divorce was finalized 8 months later. Becky moved to Virginia, ostensibly to be closer to Kyle, though the Harris family made it clear they weren't interested in a closer relationship. She found a job with the school district there and rented a small apartment about 20 minutes from Kyle's high school. Ethan chose to stay with me. "She's not the same person anymore," he told me when I asked if he wanted to spend more time with his mother. "It's like she thinks I'm some kind of consolation prize." I kept my mouth shut about the irony. Becky had become so focused on the son she'd never really had that she'd lost the one she'd actually raised. The relationship with the Harris family stabilized once Becky was out of the picture. Jack and I developed a genuine friendship based on shared military experience and the strange situation we found ourselves navigating together. Sarah was kind to Ethan without trying to replace Becky, and Kyle seemed more relaxed when he visited without the complicated emotional dynamics my ex-wife had introduced. Ethan and Kyle remained close but separate. Two boys connected by genetics and circumstance but shaped by different families and different lives. They texted regularly, visited each other during holidays, shared certain interests and mannerisms that clearly came from shared DNA. But they weren't brothers in any traditional sense, and they didn't try to be. "It's weird," Ethan told me once, "knowing I have this whole other family I could have grown up with. But I can't imagine being anyone other than who I am." "Genetics aren't destiny," I said. "Biology gives you a starting point, but everything else comes from the choices you make and the people who raise you." "Do you ever think about what Kyle would have been like if he'd grown up here?" "Sometimes. But then I think about what you would have been like growing up with the Harris family, and I realize it doesn't matter. You're my son. Not because of DNA, but because of 14 years of being your father." 2 years later, Ethan started his junior year of high school. He'd grown 3 inches, made varsity basketball, and developed an interest in engineering that reminded me of my own practical approach to problem solving. Kyle was thriving in Virginia. Honor roll student. Played guitar in a local band. Had Sarah's artistic eye and Jack's quiet determination. Sometimes I wondered what would have happened if we'd never done that DNA test. If Becky had never had her doubts. If we'd continued raising Ethan without knowing about the hospital mistake. Would we have been happier? Would our marriage have survived? But then I thought about Kyle growing up without knowing his biological family, and Ethan never meeting the Harris family who clearly cared about him. The truth was complicated and painful, but it was still the truth. On a Saturday afternoon in October, I was in the garage working on my truck when Ethan appeared with a basketball under his arm. "Want to shoot some hoops?" he asked. We went to the driveway where the basketball hoop I'd installed when he was 7 still stood. He'd outgrown the height adjustment, but it was still solid, still functional. "Dad," he said, taking a shot from the free throw line, "I've been thinking about college applications." "Yeah, what about them?" "I want to major in engineering. Maybe mechanical, maybe aerospace." He retrieved the ball and passed it to me. "I know I'm good at math and science, but I don't know if that's because I inherited it or because you helped me with homework for 8 years. I took a shot, missed. "Does it matter?" "Kind of. I mean, Kyle is artistic like Sarah, and he's got Jack's way of thinking through problems step by step. But I'm more like you. I like taking things apart to see how they work." "Ethan, you're going to be good at whatever you choose to be good at. Not because of what you inherited from me or what you might have inherited from Jack Harris, but because of who you've chosen to become." He nodded, took another shot. This one went in. "I'm glad you're my dad," he said quietly. "I'm glad you're my son." Standing there in the driveway with my boy, because that's what he was, genetics aside, I realized that family isn't about blood or DNA or hospital records. It's about showing up day after day, year after year. It's about teaching someone to throw a basketball, helping with algebra homework, being there when they're scared or proud or confused about their place in the world. Becky had been right about one thing. The situation had changed everything, but not in the way she'd expected. It hadn't revealed the falseness of our family. It had revealed the strength of it. The bonds we'd built over 14 years were stronger than any revelation about biology could break. The Harris family had Kyle, and they'd raised him well. We had Ethan, and we'd raised him well too. The hospital mistake had created an unusual situation, but it hadn't created a tragedy. It had just made our family more complicated and maybe more honest about what really mattered. That evening, Kyle called to tell Ethan about a song his band had written. Sarah texted me a photo of Kyle at a guitar recital. Jack sent his quarterly update about Kyle's grades and college plans, a tradition we'd developed to keep both families informed about both boys. It wasn't the family structure anyone would have chosen, but it worked. 2 boys, 2 families, connected by an accident of hospital administration, but sustained by deliberate choices to love and support each other despite the complications. I never remarried. Ethan graduated valedictorian, got a full scholarship to engineering school, and still calls me every Sunday. Kyle got into art school, visits twice a year, and sends me photos of his projects. The Harris family remains close friends, bound by shared experience and genuine affection. Becky eventually moved back to North Carolina and found work with a different school district. She sees Ethan occasionally, maintains polite contact with Kyle, but never rebuilt the relationships she damaged during those chaotic months after the revelation. Some bridges, once burned, can't be reconstructed, but that's her loss, not ours. Family is what you build, not what you're born with, and we built something that lasted, something that survived the truth and came out stronger on the other side. Subscribe if you agree.